Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Earthly Headlines. Today we're going to talk about the Casulian people, who are, I'm not sure if they're a Semitic people, but they are a people from Jordan that date to about close to 7,000 years ago. And they didn't leave any records of themselves. Everything that's left of them is either artifacts or some sort of metallurgy or written works from later people talking about them. So they found these excavators found what they're saying is the earliest form of writing, which is a secret visual code, which is about they're getting it from a 6,000-year-old copper hoard from this place called Nahal Mishmar, which is in the Judean desert, which again is near the hills of Hebron, all the way up in northern is the border of Jordan and Israel, near the Dead Sea. Pretty interesting stuff. And the way that these copper artifacts were made, not only did they contain this ancient code that they're speculating is the earliest form of primitive writing, but also they were made using this the lost wax process, which is essentially just a way to create a duplicate of something. So you get one artifact and then you put it in this cast and then you make a duplicate of it, and then they're able to create all these different types of intricate artifacts and tools and cups and all these different figures. They found this stuff in 1961. 400 copper objects wrapped in a tattered mat in a cavern on the nearly inaccessible slopes of Nahal Mishmar, which is basically a stream that flows into the Dead Sea. At the time, it was hailed as one of the greatest prehistoric finds in Israel and in the world. It revealed unsuspected sophistication. Again, these are people who date around 6,400 to almost 7,000 years ago, and they were expected to not know much in terms of technology and especially metallurgy, but they had an unsuspected sophistication and advanced knowledge of metallurgy among the people who inhabited the Levant during that time, the Copper Age or the Chalcolithic Age, whatever you want to call it. Again, these people are the Casulian. Here's a picture of, I don't think this is the excavation site, but this is just some of the topography in the area. They did carbon-14 dating of the mat that held the artifacts together, and it shows that the hoard goes back to around 4300 BC. So again, about 6,300 years from the present. Again, it displays a level of craftsmanship that was thought unthinkable for that period. Most of the artifacts were produced using the lost wax technique. I just told you what that was. It's complex and time-consuming and very, very advanced for its time. Some of the alloys included copper, obviously, arsenic, and other metals, and the source were as far as Anatolia and the Caucasus. Again, I've done a few episodes on this where a lot of stuff seems to come from Turkey, modern-day Turkey, Armenia, and the modern-day Caucasus Mountains, Azerbaijan, Dagestan, all these different places in that area. And it seems for sure that they had some sort of relationship with the people of the Levant. And again, I don't know if it was, some people call it diffusion, some people think it was a barter system that existed, and I did a video on that. I think it was like a couple episodes ago. You guys should check that out. And most researchers agree that the objects had some kind of ritualistic purpose. So again, the raw materials are coming from these areas pretty far away from the Levant in terms of walking distance, and they're using this material to create ritualistic stuff, again indicative of religion and tolerance between these two populations in terms of religion again. And so was it one religion that they had, or did everyone just have freedom of religion and everyone believed what they believed? Again, it's that kind of stuff is unclear the further you go back. And again, before 1961, these people weren't even thought to have existed, or if they did exist, they were just in the periphery of history. They didn't produce their own primary works of obviously of text or anything like that to self-identify. They were just referred to by other people. So again, these people lived before recorded history. They didn't leave much except this hypothesis, which is basically these depictions of animals, birds, human noses, and other motifs found on the artifacts. And they know for sure that they're just not random decorations or just random symbolic images, but really they're trying to tell some sort of, they're trying to give some sort of message through this three-dimensional code. So just to break this down, each image symbolizes a word or phrase and communicates a certain concept. Again, this idea is thought as a precursor to early writing systems that would emerge centuries later in Mesopotamia and Egypt. And here's more of the artifacts here. Pretty interesting stuff for being close to 7,000 years old. They look in pretty good condition. I mean, granted, these are all cleaned up and stuff, but this is incredible find. Amzalag, he's the guy analyzing all of the stuff in the hoard, and he speculates on the semantics and the iconography. So to understand what he's talking about, you have to understand logograms, which is basically a graphic symbol that represents a particular word. So in its simplest form, a logogram could signify a word by resembling the physical object they were meant to represent, such as an ox or a stalk of wheat, and they can convey more abstract concepts too, such as the rebus principle, which is basically using a character that sounds like very similar to a complex idea that they're trying to convey, otherwise known as a phonogram. So, for example, the pronoun I can also be written by drawing an image of the eye, that type of stuff. So in one case, there's a depiction of a two-headed or four-headed horned animal, which might be an ibex, some sort of ibex. There's no particular connection between ibexes and metallurgy, but the West Semitic word used for young ungulates, which is, again, an ibex here, sounds very familiar to the designation of dust and ore. So ofer, I don't know how to pronounce this, O-F-E-R is a young deer, and afar, A-F-A-R, is dust. So these two are very closely phonetically linked, even though their actual meanings have nothing to do with each other. So this is the crux, this is the basis of this hypothesis that this researcher is positing. The young ibexes were a phonogram for the mineral ore that made up these very artifacts. The need to mix two or more ores to create the alloys used in the Nahal Mishmar hoard, which is basically the fused bodies of these animals. Again, when they see two animals fused together, they think that that these ancient people were trying to communicate the idea of mixing two alloys. And they're getting all that just from this symbol of two together. Now, I wonder what Martin Sweatman would think about this, because he's into zodiacal dating. So any depiction of animals could be some sort of communication through, instead of through metallurgy here, it would be through the stars and the sky. So an ibex could for example, could represent Taurus. So I'm going to send this over to Martin Sweatman and see what he thinks. Here's another example, a representation of a human nose, which is pronounced A-N-P, ANP, in early Semitic language, which is connected to its use as a verbal root, expressing the boosting of a fire by blowing air on it. That's interesting. So he sees a semantic link between these representations of nesting birds and the craft of metalworking, because the term for nesting in early Semitic languages is similar to Q-A-Y-N, kayin, an archaic designation of metallurgy. So again, birds, the word for birds, or two birds, or one bird, I don't know, whatever, these nesting birds have a phonetically, I wouldn't say sound, but there is a phonetic connection between that and, again, metallurgy. He interprets the frequent depictions of round globular masses to represent the form that raw copper takes when it's heated. So there's a bunch of these symbols that he goes through. And then his second argument for this being a coded language is because metallurgy itself, which is a process of heating rocks, extracting metal, and mixing and matching stuff, was seen as magical and a divine activity at the time. So people who were engaging in that stuff must have been part of some sort of esoteric society. It's a very stringent not anybody could have this knowledge. So maybe they had a coded language to maintain that secrecy. Knowledge of this divine craft would have been kept within a close circle of people, shared only with a select few. That doesn't seem out of the realm of possibility, because there's a ton of secret societies back then that preserved knowledge and information as well. Like the Dead Sea Scrolls and the Essene Brotherhood are a good example of that. Requires initiation and several rites of passage, and having a visual code is part of that. They aim to understand and represent what they were doing. And then they talk about some of the Semitic texts from the Bronze and Iron Ages. This again, all this is assuming that the Casulians spoke a Semitic language. We're not even sure what the Casulians even spoke. So if they did, then we can decipher the supposed symbolism of Chalcolithic iconography using these words. But again, there's no guarantee that they did speak a Semitic language. There are a lot of people coming and going prior to that time. So in order to really get to the bottom of this, we would have to trace Semitic languages further back than just 7,000 years ago, which currently is not. Major cultural changes occurred in the Levant during the transition between the Copper and the Bronze Age. Obviously, the figures that M. Zalag sees as representations of young ibexes could well be goats. Figurative motif that appears also in context, not linked to metallurgy, such as an ossuary. So, again, I wonder what Martin Sweatman would think about this, because from Sweatman's point of view, it would be more to do with the stars, again, like I mentioned earlier, and it wouldn't matter what language they were speaking. As long as you had the symbols there, then that's all you would need to communicate what's in the sky. Again, it's very interesting that this is even an issue in the first place. In earlier periods, we find two-headed anthropomorphic figurines. A doubling of something can simply be a way to emphasize its importance. So again, the doubling, the merging of two animals, just like my aforementioned example, it's not a new thing in history. It's been there are older figures that do the same thing without metallurgy. So again, that's just nothing beyond speculation there. Is it connected to the writing systems that developed later in the Middle East? That could be true, but again, there's no proof. Although there are some highly disputed finds that are even older than this hoard at Nahal Mishmar that we're talking about now. So the Despilio tablet is an engraved wooden tablet found on a lake in Greece, and the Tartaria tablets, engraved artifacts found in Romania, a Neolithic village in Romania. But those two are very highly controversial, and the dates, they can't even get the dates right on those. So again, a lot of this article is tempered by the pros and cons of believing this. So the first ascertained writing systems of antiquity were likely created for financial reasons, like receipts, transactions, and stuff like that. That's long been the case. I don't know. Maybe that we just haven't found anything yet. I'm not sold either way. But again, that's something to note, because those are among the first examples of writing are these transactions. Still, given that the unique alloys in that Nahal Mishmar artifact show that already in the Chalcolithic there was a trade network, referred to my last video about that allowed for the transfer and goods of knowledge over vast distances. So it's possible that ideas like this and the Rebus principle and metallurgy, all this stuff developed by these Casulian metalworkers, they were later adopted. Not only were they later adopted by other civilizations in the region, but it seems like if they knew it back then at least 6,400 to 7,000 years ago, this trade network was already there, already robust, and a lot of this knowledge and interaction with a largely vast amount of people for that time period was in existence for a while. So again, there's a lot there. This shouldn't just be swept under the rug just because this is just some sort of speculation. And speculation is good for sussing stuff out, and good for discussion, and good for developing the science and the knowledge base into the future. So even if this guy is wrong, it's still worth it to have the conversation. The eventuality of a relationship between the visual code developed first among the Casulians and later in Egypt and in Mesopotamia should not be ruled out. So again, these Casulians could have been the precursor to Egypt and Mesopotamia just because of the fact that they had advanced metallurgy alone, because that's such a huge advantage in the ancient world, that 7,000 years ago. It wasn't a single person who traveled to Anatolia to procure the goods. It certainly was not the metal workers themselves who did the traveling. So again, this is indicative of some sort of network. It's very interesting what was going on back there. It must have been a hub of, not just a hub, but the whole region must have been teeming with some sort of activity. Just because we find again and again these metals that are sourced in way further regions than where they're found. So anyway, let me know what you guys think about metallurgy, the development of writing, language, the merging of the two, Martin Sweatman, zodiacal dating, anything at all to do the Caucasus, Anatolia. If you know anything about the Levant or about this site, the Casulians, leave me something in the comments, and I'll talk to you guys later.